Hello. Hello, this is the My Artifact episode number 3764. Today's date is December 18, 2025. It's been almost like a morning at 7:48 p.m. AM, sorry, AM. Okay, it's a morning at 7:48 AM. Alright, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. Alright, the question is, what if the friction character was real? Okay, that's a really good question. Alright, yeah, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force you to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, or when I try to create that reality, I'm kind of like a somebody utilizing my knowledge and information and experience that I've been through. And it somehow it kind of like a felt really good. Somehow it kind of like felt good. I don't know how do I supposed to make sense, but it kind of like a feel like knowledgeable or things like that. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's a raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. It's just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Now regarding about the question says that what if the friction character was real? That's a really good question, but I just like I try to understand, but that's a very like a I don't know. Okay, let me give you the context. Okay, yeah. So a cartoon character kind of like look really funny in real world. Okay, yeah. Let's just say that Tom and Jerry are kind of like a running. Okay, yeah, in the real world. Okay, yeah. So the Tom represent the cat, Jerry represent the mouse, but the both are look very differently regarding about the real cat and real mouse. Whatever, we just accept that thing. They are kind of like a look like the same way that they are kind of like a looking like in the cartoon. Okay, yeah. Now regarding about the way that they are kind of like a doing like basically is this thing when the Tom running behind the Jerry, and suddenly Tom finds out that he was kind of like a falling from very higher ground. The way that he fall was kind of like a very funnily. Okay, yeah. Like for a couple of seconds, he just don't really know he was kind of like a running, and he doesn't really have kind of like a surface underneath. Okay, yeah. And he just looked at the camera and then he kind of like a fall down. It's a kind of like a really very funny and kind of like an animated way to kind of like a tell it, but in reality it doesn't happen like that. Okay, yeah. So there is a kind of like a chaos is actually happened, like the physics are kind of like a utilizing in their world or our world, because in our world when there is no surface beneath, you just fall down. You will not gonna kind of like simply stay there for a second and you will gonna look it into the camera and kind of like say that you realize there is no surface at all. No, you just kind of like when there is no surface at all, you just kind of like suddenly just fall down. Okay, yeah. So gravity, sorry, the physics law kind of like a something change, or I'm not really sure what exactly happened. It kind of like a look really funny when this thing is actually happened in real life. Okay, yeah. One thing. Another thing is that a superhero. Let's talk about the Hulk. Okay, yeah. So if the Hulk is a kind of like a something jump for almost like a kilometer and he landed on the city, so from the perspective, from the looking at the camera, it kind of like look like whoa, what a badass entry. But while it doing it, that it kind of like a somebody destroy the city, na. It kind of like a destroy the underneath the pipeline, electric cable or subway or things like that, because there are so many things are actually connected. Not only that, there is a kind of like a somebody street or building or where that particular Hulk land, that particular area will gonna destroy. So it doesn't make any sense that this particular person is a superhero or super villain, because he doesn't kind of like a doing as a work as a superhero. kind of like a doing as a work as a kind of like a villain because it destroys stuff like that. Okay, yeah. Another thing, magic. Okay, let's say there is a kind of like a something the a Harry Potter kind of like a doing the magic. Now in the real world it's a very like a unthing, like it's not really possible. Like let's just say that there is a Harry Potter kind of like a spell that something something and suddenly kind of like a something the people flies in the air and things like that. It's it's like that na, ki it's not really like, it's a very different thing. Like what I'm trying to tell you is this thing na, it's not about the bringing the friction character into the real world. It's kind of like a bringing the physics and their reality into the real world. Now for us this is kind of like a friction for us, but for them it's a reality. Let's just say Harry Potter come into the real life and his reality is kind of like a doing a magic. Now when he was kind of like a doing a magic in the real world, for us it kind of like a very scary to us. Like I don't know what he could be able to be do. Okay, yeah, I know that Harry Potter is a really good guy, but still he holds a kind of like a, such a power of magic that might be people might gonna scared, probably. Okay, yeah. And I'm just talking about the just a Harry Potter. What about the Voldemort? Okay, like what if the Voldemort came into the real life? Now he will kind of like do lot of chaos and things like that. Like our weapons are useless. Okay, the weapon that we have is completely useless. Like what should we supposed to be control that Voldemort? Should I use gun? Should I use missile? Should I use nuclear bomb? I don't know what would I supposed to do. It's completely just like very vulnerable regarding about what kind of like a weapon that we use. Voldemort is always 10 step ahead of us. Okay, yeah. So this is the problem is not kind of like a simply solved by the Harry Potter. It kind of like a solved by the humans to us too. Okay, yeah, because like we are kind of like sharing the same reality, and that's what kind of like a very confusing. Okay, yeah. Uh, what about Superman? Let's take a Superman. So it's just like that, na, ki if I wanted to think about every possible point of perspective, it felt like really amazing in one context, but it kind of like a felt really weird. Imagine there is a kind of like a simply villain kind of like a gather together, like a Voldemort, Joker, Thanos. Okay, yeah, they kind of like a gather together. They kind of like a sort of build a team. Okay, yeah, and kind of like some heroes will kind of like some gather together, and they also build the team too, like Superman, Batman, Iron Man, Captain America. Okay, yeah, and kind of like a some the every cartoon character and every kind of like a magical character are kind of like a came alive in the real world. Now the battle is actually happened. It was like oh my god, they might gonna destroy the planet. Literally, yeah, they might gonna destroy the planet because the power that they are holding is, boy, literally just like a, it's just like a really fucked up thing. Okay, yeah. So I don't know, is this thing na ki somehow it kind of like a felt really good to have this kind of like sort of friction character in reality, but in reality is a very like very not good stuff too. Like basically just think about that ki someone wrote a kind of like a book about you. Okay, yeah, your entire life and things and that, and now that particular person doesn't really knew that. Okay, yeah, and when that particular person knew that, he kind of like a feel really pissed off, right? Take an example as a Harry Potter. Okay, yeah, so Harry Potter come to the real life, and then he realized that J.K. Rowling wrote the entire movie, wrote the entire kind of like a life regarding about him. He was kind of like really frustrated. He was gonna say that who kind of like give you right to kind of like write a book about me. And there is a question actually arise that ki who actually kind of like a Harry Potter, like basically like who, like how does Harry Potter born, like basically J.K. Rowling kind of like a give them birth, or kind of like a something like Harry Potter mother. It was like it's a very kind of like a chaotic and things like that. It's not really sure what exactly happened. It's a very confusion, chaos and things happen. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that na ki Star Trek. Oh my god. Okay. Star Trek is a kind of like a very crazy. Like look at their kind of like some ships buildings and stuff like that. Imagine they came to the real life. What if like they are kind of like somebody the USS Enterprise would come to the atmosphere? Oh mother of god, dude. It was like a really fucked up thing. Okay, there is also kind of like a something one movie called Independence Day. Okay, Independence Day, a Hollywood movie, the kind of like assembly the spaceship is equivalent to the size of entire Atlantic and came to the planet. Oh my god, when he kind of like landed on the planet, he would crack the entire planet. That particular ship will kind of crack the entire planet. Like this would be kind of like a very catastrophic, dude. It was kind of like a very disaster situation. Okay, but probably is this thing I'm just counting a kind of like only superheroes and things and that. But the movies are kind of like a made by the such a normal people too. Okay, and what if they could come to the real life? Example is this thing. Let's take a Bollywood movie. Had Jab We Met three people like the Rancho and things like that. What if the Rancho came to the real life? Well, he does not do any kind of like a somebody kind of like a very that much impactful, but he definitely gonna add something really value. He would kind of like tell them that key what is actually being an engineer, what is actually is this thing suffering and things and that. There are multiples of kind of like a similar scenario would gonna happen, and I don't know how do I supposed to explain this thing. It's a kind of like a really great in this particular context, but it's somewhat something not, because I kind of like realize that in the movie in the friction world that we are kind of like seeing in the movies, it kind of like some frictionalized version of the people who actually create that particular world. The kind of like a writer and director kind of like decide that how do I supposed to showcase that entire character look that much grand and things like that. So that's why they kind of like somebody doing that particular creating that particular world that kind of like make him look like that grand or things like that. Example, Hulk or Iron Man, the way that they kind of like shoot the laser from their suit or kind of like show them their strength and things like that, they are kind of like a creativity by the particular people. Now basically there is a question actually arise that key who actually give them power, the writer director give them power or they actually hold the power. It's a very confusing in this particular context because both are kind of like a sharing the same reality, and that's what kind of like a things became so much weird in the same context. Okay, yeah. And 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 there are so many friction characters, so many different friction character who are kind of like suddenly came to the real life. It was like a, I don't know how do I supposed to explain. Okay, yeah, it's bit really confusing, chaotic, and things like that. Okay, yeah, it's a kind of like a really fun to think about that possible point of perspective, but yeah, it kind of like suddenly create a chaos in this particular world. Okay. But if such thing will gonna happen, then probably is this thing that our government should supposed to be understand that ki, this is not a kind of like a something like that. It's a they kind of like consider that it's a threat. Okay, yeah. So what they will gonna do is that ki, they will kind of like a something that ki, categorized by the people like people who are came from the friction world and things like that. They have to kind of like a live in particular different part of the world. Okay, like basically Antarctica or kind of like a somewhere things that they might not gonna harm, like basically the Harry Potter people, like basically people who are kind of like doing the magic or people who have kind of like some power or things like that. They are not able to be live with us because it's not really good for them. Or else this is the another thing is that ki kind of like a government will gonna teach them regarding about that ki human rights and things like that. Like government will gonna tell them that okay, you hold this is like this power, this power, this power, but it's not really good to utilize that power in real world. So basically government will kind of like tell them kind of like a simply lesson that what should you supposed to do and what should you shouldn't supposed to be do and things like that. Okay, yeah, they kind of like tell them thing. If the kind of like a friction character will understand that ki okay, like a hero people might gonna understand okay, we will kind of like a follow your rule and things like that, but villain people don't really understand. So this is kind of like a simply another challenge that we have, that how do we supposed to stop that villain people. So in this particular context we might gonna utilize the hero, but they're kind of like a some knowledge and information to how do I supposed to defeat those people and things like that. Okay, yeah. Now there is also another creativity is actually happened, that what if the kind of like a writer and director who kind of like a create that friction world, what if they could manipulate them. Like basically is this thing that the creator and director who kind of like a create those reality, they would kind of like assembly diminishing their kind of like assembly power or things like that. Or maybe I don't know, they would kind of like release a kind of like something, a movie regarding about the Iron Man is became really powerless, or Superman became powerless and things like that, and suddenly every superhero are became really powerless and things like that. This might be a kind of like some things would gonna happen probably, but it's not really, I'm not really sure how this thing happened, but yeah, it would be that. Okay, yeah. So yeah, this would be kind of like a things. Okay, yeah, but still now friction world is kind of like a somebody very different kind of like a friction world. What if the transformer robots would kind of like a come to the real life? Oh my god, like a look at around yourself, like a, you might gonna see almost like a 25 feet of kind of like a robot kind of like a somebody looking at you, and you just kind of like a fuck up, oh fuck is this thing. At the first glance you might gonna kind of like realize that that's really cool and things like that, but when he walk and when he transform through that robot to truck, probably you might gonna scared. Okay, yeah, because you are not really sure is this car or is this kind of like a someone body. Probably. Okay, yeah. But it's a kind of like a really cool in this own context. Okay, yeah. Now talk about the alien. Okay, in the friction world, alien are kind of like a mentioned multiple times. Sometimes alien kind of like a represent and things like that. Now what if the alien would come to the real life? Now this is kind of like a, somebody creates another problem, because in this particular world, in the friction world, they are not even human, they are kind of like a, somebody just a fucking aliens. And right now you just have to take their kind of like, you just have to kind of, I don't know how to I supposed to explain this thing, like you have to kind of like a trap them, kind of like a put them into the area 51, a kind of like a very secured area and things like that. Probably, I'm not really sure about that. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that now humans are very crazy regarding about the enthusiastic and things like that. So basically, let's just understand that what if like a Iron Man would kind of like have a suit that kind of like so many people can fly and things like that. So what does real government will gonna do? Kind of like a take the Iron Man, kind of like a somebody take his suits and kind of like a do the experiment and things like that. Figure it out that how the Iron Man suit can able to be kind of like a fly that way and things and that and that. Now this is a kind of like a very basic way to kind of like a somebody enthusiasm and things like that. But what if kind of like a somebody take a vampire or take a kind of like somebody the Harry Potter? Like humans are always kind of like a somebody always enthusiastic regarding about how the Harry Potter kind of like a do the magic, and they are kind of like a dissecting in them regarding about every possible point of perspective. Also regarding about they will kind of like a dissect the every kind of like a superhero or super villain or things like that, so that how they're supposed to do like that. Okay, it's kind of like something crazy in its own things, but it's kind of like a something like some like it's not really that na ki humans are crazy, humans are evil. Like it's not kind of like some evils are like yeah, like we are living in this world where kind of like everyone are evil. It's not not everyone are evil, like some people are evil, some people are not and things like that, and you just have to kind of like figure it out all the possible point of perspective. And I don't know. Things might be very crazy in this particular context, but this is actually happen if the kind of like a friction character come to the real life. Okay, it's just my opinion. It kind of like a went so many crazy things will gonna happen. All right. Okay, so this is my opinion, and thank you.